My name's Andy Uttley. Thank you very much for joining today. I'm going to talk to you about off the grid, or to give it its full, much more descriptive title, using location intelligence to place solar panels in Rwanda. So, like I say, my name's Andy. I work for Javelin Group. Javelin Group are part of Accenture Strategy. We are retail consultants who partner with lots of different platforms. One of those is Alteryx, which is mostly what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm an Alteryx ace, which means I'm very prevalent in the Alteryx community. That's part of their online platform. It also means I do things like this here today. I'm also an Alteryx expert, which means I've been lucky enough to sit in the tool for long enough that means I can pass some of their exams as well. Normally with these slides, if you've been to presentations like this before, you're supposed to do a slide that shows something about you, make you much more sort of nice towards the audience. I'm not going to show you something that I like. I'm going to show you something that, in fact, I hate. And that's gardening. And there's a reason I'm showing you the gardening here today. That's actually the start of my journey of what I want to talk to you about in terms of off the grid and using spatial analytics in Rwanda. So the reason I actually show that picture of me doing gardening is, like many organizations now, as part of Accenture, we get, I think it's 3 days a year that we can go do outreach work outside of standard client work. And sometimes that can be quite tricky to find the right kind of projects to work on. And we actually did a team away day not too far away from here, in South London, I think it was, where we were renovating a park, which was a really brilliant cause, and we saw the results of that, and it was fantastic, some of the work the team did. But as you can imagine, a team of data analysts probably aren't the best hands-on gardeners in the world, and that's pretty much the only picture of me doing anything, and that's only because my boss's camera was out at the time. So that's really where the journey began, and I thought, well, hang on, we all get these days every year, which I'm sure many of you do in your work as well. So I thought, why can't we try use some of our skills that we do day in, day out, and some of the things that we're actually good at for good? Now, that's in no way a new idea whatsoever. A lot of CSR teams, corporate social responsibility teams, have been onto that for a while. The challenge more so is actually just being able to find some of those projects, and that's partly what I'm going to talk to you about now, the project I've been working on in Rwanda using data and analytics and Alteryx to solve a problem, and then also a little bit about how I solved that problem in Alteryx as well. So I'll talk a little bit about the partnership between Javelin, Alteryx, who's the platform, and an organization called NPSS, who I've been partnering with to find these sorts of projects. I'll talk about Meshpower as well. Meshpower are the organization based in Rwanda who I've been working alongside. I'll talk a bit about their analytic challenge and how I solved that. There'll also be a demo as well. That demo will be in Alteryx if we've got time at the end. And then also if there is a little bit of time, we can discuss questions, or if anyone wants to come see me after and you want to find out a bit more about how to get involved with this kind of thing. Maybe you're just interested in Alteryx and you want to learn a bit more about the tool. Feel free to come see me or head over to the Alteryx stand, which is actually just behind us, straight after this or tomorrow. So whilst I'm going to talk about a location problem in Rwanda, the reality is we work in retail consulting. This is the kind of problem we see in retail all the time as well. I'm saying, where should we put solar panels? But actually, it might be, where should we put a store, or where should we put a distribution center? They're all the same problem, really. So a little bit about that partnership. So I work for Javelin Group. NPSS are an organization that my friend and I have been slowly setting up. It's very much in its early stages, which is a not-for-profit to work with other not-for-profits or charitable organizations to try help them solve these kinds of problems. So what do NPSS do? They partner with social startup enterprises. So my friend Kieran actually took 6 months out to go work in Rwanda, the main purpose being to go meet lots of other startups who are doing lots of social good bits of work. One of those was Meshpower, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, so I won't go into too much detail on that right now. The other half of it, which is how do they do it? Well, they partner with people like us at Javelin, Accenture, Alteryx, so platforms as well. And we've got people from PwC, Concentra, all over involved, trying to offer their time to get relevant projects that are good for the organizations on the left, but also good for the individuals as well. So you can develop your skills in an environment that's actually something for social good. So that partnership is right now really between Javelin, NPSS, and at the forefront of that is Alteryx as well. Alteryx have a program called Alteryx for Good, and they are providing some of these people with the software free of charge so they can run a lot of this work themselves. So they're bringing analytics into a context that directly empowers people's lives, which hopefully is what I'm going to show in a second. Helping our partners turn into sustainable organizations. A big bit of what we do is we don't want to do 3 days consultancy remotely and then that's it, we're gone. It's how can we empower these people to start doing a lot of this work themselves as well. And lastly, develop reusable tools so we can take what we're doing now and move it around other organizations as well. So that's who I am, that's who Javelin, Alteryx, NPSS are. I want to talk about Meshpower because that's really what I'm here to talk to you about today. So who are Meshpower? Well, they connect communities with clean energy. And for me, one of the main shocks I had when I first spoke to Kieran about his time in Rwanda was actually only 51% of houses in Rwanda have access to electricity. Only 51%. So that's obviously only half, so a really small number. That's made up of 37% of houses have access through the national grid, so cities like Kigali, which is the capital there, are on the national grid and other places. And then 14% as well have access through other means that might be other microgrid systems and things like that. Rwanda have a really aggressive challenge that they're trying to sort here, which is by 2024, their ambition is that 100% of homes across Rwanda will have access to electricity, which is obviously a great goal. And that's where Meshpower come in, really. So they really play in this 14% area here. They're not trying to expand the national grid. They're using their own grid systems, which are solar panels, really, to help reach these different communities. So how do they do that? And this is kind of relevant for the analytic problem in a minute. Well, I first probably quite naively thought that solar panels would be, let's just put solar panels on the houses. That's not at all what it is. They've got a fantastic engineering solution that is really just a solar panel hub that sits at the heart of a village or a town or something like that, that they can then call what's called a base station there. So they're not on top of the homes at all, it's a base station. That base station then has cables that reach out of different lengths to different communities. That length can range anything from about 100 meters all the way up to 2 kilometers. So it's a really powerful solar panel that they have here. Those cables go down into the homes, into what's called a Meshpower unit. Those units that you see there have lots of different connections, like USB connections and things like that, that then allow them to power these homes. For context, Meshpower have already done this 70 times across Rwanda. They're powering homes, local businesses, small and medium businesses as well, which is a really important part of it. This is all about sustainability. Can these communities then afford to maintain this base station? And actually, is it going to help with that sort of social and economic growth in those areas outside of the cities? So how can we help businesses stay open later or do a better job than they're doing already? And this is a great way that they're helping them do that. The other half is they work with schools, refugee camps, clinics and things like that, so that actually more people are able to help even more people then. So that's who Meshpower are, and that's who they were up until the point I met them. So that's all the sort of spiel I was given when I first spoke to them. But I was given an analytic challenge, and the challenge that they came to me was really a seemingly simple one, which is we're going to help Rwanda try get to this goal of 100% by 2024. In order to do that, we're about to get funding, hopefully, for 70 new sites. Now, 70 sites is actually quite a massive number because, as you'll remember, some of these reach up to 2 kilometers each. So that's a potentially large part of Rwanda that they're trying to target. Of course, with any funding application or any sort of business context like that, you have to justify what you're doing. And it's no different here. So they really have to justify what are the 70 best sites and why. So whenever I work on any analytic problem, I try to see it in this way. What's the question and what are the constraints against that? So the question is simple. What are the 70 best sites? But what do we mean by best sites? So how can we rank those different sites? Well, the obvious one is number of people and number of homes that each site, potential site, could reach. The number of infrastructure nearby. So we were actually really lucky that we could retrospectively look back at the 70 sites they already had. They found that being near infrastructure hotspots like schools, hospitals and things like that were a really good indicator that they're going to be areas that are actually going to be able to afford relatively small amounts of money, but to maintain this, so they're not just putting it in and 2 years later it's worthless. So infrastructure was a really key point. An obvious one, but wasn't to me at the start. The first results I gave them was like, oh, this is a great place called Kigali, we should put something like, yeah, that's the city, that's the capital, we don't need to put it there, it's on the national grid. So we want to avoid that. And then finally, income and financial variables as well. So we want to know how much do these people earn roughly, so are they able to continue to pay for it, and we can invest that money into putting it into clinics and refugee camps and places like that as well. Thanks. So the solution, the first thing we thought was there's 3 possible ways, all with Alteryx, that we'd be able to help in varying difficulty. The first was to take a retrospective look and just say, okay, so here are your 70 sites already. Let's do some data cleansing and reporting on that using Alteryx, maybe a bit of Tableau as well. The reality is that's quick, but these are people that can engineer solar panels that reach 2 kilometers. They don't need us to come in and help with that. The second one is, why don't we use nearest neighbor analysis? Now this is getting a bit more complex using some of the R tools in Alteryx. That's saying, you see it a lot in sport actually. So I support Huddersfield Town. My favourite player, Aaron Moy, left. And it's how can we replace that player? Well, we look at that player's stats. So how good at dribbling is he? How good at crossing, passing, speed, all that kind of stuff. That will then find the nearest behavioural players to that player. It's no different in business. We see it with stores and customers and products as well. So here we'd be saying, this was a really good site in the first 70 we did. Behaviourally, find more like that. Now, I like that as a solution, but there's actually a problem at the heart of that, which is you've got to be pretty confident that you've found the Aaron Moy or the Lionel Messi of sites, which I don't have the context to do that. So we try to avoid that. The final one was a really thorough approach, which is actually what I'm going to demo in a second. So I've actually, spoiler alert, I've told you this is the one we've chosen. We said, let's just literally place grids everywhere in Rwanda and test every single part of Rwanda. If we put a grid there, how good would it be? Now, obviously, that's the most thorough approach. Our worry at first was, one, that's going to take ages to build, and 2, it's going to take ages to run. They want to keep running this for different areas and things like that. We want to make it sustainable for them as well. The reality was, the solution I'm about to show you now and do a quick demo of in about 5 minutes, took about 3 days to build. We could have built it a bit quicker if I was slightly less naive to how things worked out there already. And actually, depending on how many reports we want out the other end of it, it takes about, at best, it takes about 28 seconds to run and test every possible site in Rwanda. So I guess that's the power of Alteryx there. Just out of interest, who here has used Alteryx before by show of hands? Okay, maybe about a third then. So we've used Alteryx to answer all this, and part of the reason, as I talk about the solution now, that I chose to use Alteryx, apart from the fact that I use it every day, is it's brilliant as a data ETL tool, so bringing data in and joining it, cleansing it, all that kind of stuff. But it's way more than that. It's a fantastic spatial and advanced analytic predictive tool as well. And this obviously is just a spatial problem. So what data did I need to answer that? Well, I needed the polygon or the village boundary of every village in Rwanda. I was quite surprised actually they had all of this data already readily available. Again, I'm quite naive to what is and isn't on the national grid, so I needed to be able to know what areas are not on the national grid. So using spatial joins in Alteryx, I can say okay, get rid of everything that already has electricity or already has one of these grids. So I'm left with an area of Rwanda that looks a bit like that on the screen there. I might need other spatial points. So that's things like infrastructure that I spoke about before. What schools are nearby, what hospitals are nearby. Obviously, we can justify getting the funding even more if we can target more and more clinics, hospitals, refugee camps, and that kind of stuff. They've got all this amazing data already. And lastly, and unsurprisingly, what we're all familiar with is just rows and rows of variables and numeric data, basically. And that ultimately is how we're going to choose and score what is the best possible site. So some of the Alteryx tools that we've been using here, the one on the far left that's circled in green there is called a Make Grids tool. That grid tool allowed me to just place grids that were of any distance apart that I chose. I chose 1 kilometer apart. So 1 kilometer grid, or kilometer square, across all of Rwanda. So just in that single tool, we can go from one row of data, which is coming out of that orange summarize tool, to about 43,000 rows of data. They're just kilometer square cubes, basically. The little green question mark is a spatial info tool. That allows me to see what's the center point of that square. And from there, I can do a trade area tool. So that's where we build like catchments for stores and customers and things like that. Because of course, we don't want a square radius, because that's not really how this is going to work with the cabling. We want a 2 kilometer circular radius, which is what that trade area tool is there. So I've now got effectively fake solar panel hubs all the way across Rwanda in this image here in the middle, which you can't really see because it's so zoomed out. So if I zoom in here, that's just one of the sort of 44,000 grids that we've got. That then allows us to sort of run all sorts of tests, such as which of those villages that you saw in the images before overlap with all of those grids that we've built. Now, some will overlap with just one, some will overlap with none, and that's fine, and those are ones probably already on the national grid, or areas that we don't care so much about right now. But some will overlap with more than one, and will overlap in different parts as well. So we had to be quite clever with how we use some of the other Alteryx tools after this to say, if you look at the village in the bottom left of the screen there, probably only about 10% of that village is being covered by the trade area of this particular solar panel. So the green point is this random panel that I've placed in Rwanda. The blue circle is its reach, and we can see it's reaching a small part of that village. Let's say that village has 1,000 people in it, which we would know in our data set here. We don't want to say, oh, well, we're going to get 1,000 people from that village. We're not, because we're only in about 10% of it. So we're actually then calculating what areas of these polygons are we hitting, so that we can then say, okay, that 1,000 is actually more like 100 or something like that. So there's some quite clever scoring going into it, but that still doesn't really tell us what is the best site, because just because this village here, or this solar panel targets 4 or 5 villages, that doesn't mean it's the best one. There might be no infrastructure points nearby. There might be very few people in that just wide spread out village. So we need to somehow score it. So they said to me, it was like, well, we kind of change how we want to score it based on what funding we're going for. We need to be able to justify sometimes that there are lots of high-income houses in this area. Now, this high income is obviously relatively speaking. There are areas in Rwanda that they wouldn't be able to afford this. There are relatively quite wealthy areas in Rwanda as well. There's quite a large range across Rwanda as a country. So using an Alteryx app, we were then able to allow them to just parameterize the workflow however they wanted, to say, okay, here's the 44,000 grids, score it based on, I want you to think about population, housing, infrastructure, and high income. They can turn those on and off, or they can choose to weight it however they want. That weighting will then score it and then rank them and say, okay, so what are the 70 best sites for us to choose? Well, they want to then go take that report to their funders and say, this is why we're choosing these 70 sites. So we then, using some of the reporting tools in Alteryx, we also use Tableau a little bit, but everything you see here is actually Alteryx. We built dynamic reports so that however they run it, they get a report that looks like this, that says, look, if we put a solar panel here, here's the amount of villages it's going to hit, and here are all the metrics against that, and this is why we think this is a good spot. For context, all of this work was done remotely. I've not been out to Rwanda at any point, so they do have people that now go out on motorbikes, visiting a lot of these spots just to check that actually the Polygon data and my own work was legit before they just go ahead and ask for funding for these. But that's really where we're up to at the moment. So that was all quite slide heavy. I don't want to go too technical now showing off Alteryx, but considering there's 2/3 of the audience that haven't seen it, it might be worth my while to show you this sort of pre-run version of it for 5 minutes, and then I'd be happy to take any questions after that. So for those of you that haven't used Alteryx before, Alteryx is a drag and drop tool. So I have all my tools at the top here. I can parse, transform. I've got loads of spatial tools as well that I can just pick up. Here's my make grid one, and drag it onto my workflow. That at the heart is how you would build out a workflow. To talk you through what I've done here, I've got all my inputs, which are all the polygons across Rwanda. I've got all the villages that are not on the national grid, because I don't want to take any that already do have that power. We don't want to consider those. And we're just joining. So here are, like, in Excel terms, here are our VLOOKUPs. In SQL terms, that's just a standard join as well. These purple tools here. And it travels all the way through till I get a full list, an exhaustive list of villages that we care about in Rwanda. At the moment, that looks like it's in the sea. I'm just not connected to the Wi-Fi. But you can put base maps under these if you want to as well. The other half is what I'm doing here and saying, OK, so create me those grids, and this is what you saw in the PowerPoint slides before. Create me grids everywhere in Rwanda so that we can then test those different sites. And the real logic happens in this one tool here. So this tool is called a spatial match tool. And you'll see, actually, there's quite complex analytics going on here, but the reality is they're really easy to configure. I'm just saying what trade area, so what solar panel reaches, overlap with the villages that we've got. From there, we can start to score things, come all the way through, and then we can see the sort of 9,000 villages that we're left with. Before, I kept saying we got 44,000 possible points. We go down to 10,000 because there's lots of places on the national grid or that had no village connections, so we just get rid of those as from our analysis. The scoring I've done here, I can see my scores rank from, it's kind of an arbitrary scoring really, but from 7 all the way down to close to 0. The great thing about Alteryx is we can just, by clicking on a cell, compare it to all the other data in that range. And actually quite quickly, even just as an interesting point of analysis, I can see that actually there's about 166 grids here that will have a huge amount of impact. And then the rest increasingly have about a similar but lower level impact. So this is the area here that they really want to focus on. Where are these 166 grids, which eventually will narrow down to 70 and try to get the funding to use those 70 and place them. Well, I've just sampled just one of the rows here so we can see it. There's the grid you saw before, and that filters all the way through to the reports that we had, that builds out their reports for them, which actually go straight into PDFs so that they can then batch these reports and say, here's the 70 reports of the 70 sites we're going to choose. Give that to whoever they're getting the funding for. Obviously run their own analysis as well. They've not left this to us at all. This has very much been a partnership. And actually I've learned loads by working with them as well. Go through there, try to get the funding, and then start to play some of these panels as well. The last thing I wanted to show you is if they want to run it, they just have their questions and their weightings here as an app. They don't need to know how to use Alteryx. So those of you that might not have it in your business but might want to use it, you don't have to know how to build a workflow to run one. You can just parameterize them quite easily this way if someone has built it in such a way. So let me jump back to the slides. So that's where we're up to at the moment, both Javelin, NPSS, Alteryx as well. It's very, very much the early stages, but we are partnered with a few other organizations that are crying out for help from other analysts or data-driven people. So if you do want to get involved, please do get in touch. And as we get more projects come through, I'm happy to let you know about it. You can speak to me. My contact details are on the screen there, as are Kieran, who's not actually here today. Or speak to Alteryx, who have an Alteryx for Good program, and you can kind of get in touch via them as well if you want. So I'll leave that on the screen for just a second. Some of the key points I wanted to sort of reiterate today is that partnerships are really important to us. If you're frustrated by wanting to maybe do some good at some point with your work, but struggling to find projects. I think everyone has found themselves in that boat at one point, and what we're trying to do is help solve that problem, and through people who know people out in places like Rwanda, where we've got other partners who are working in universities there, training people up. We've got people working with selling bikes to people. We've got people who are placing flooring in some of the houses there, so people aren't getting diseases through just dirt flooring. That's how we've been working. So they were some of my key points. I'd be happy to take any questions now, or if you'd rather get in touch, again, my contact details are on screen. Have we got a roaming mic for questions or anything like that? There is one, yeah. How are we for time? Oh, great, 5 minutes.
Hi, thanks, great demo. Just interested, was that all no code, no scripting? Did you have to write any code to do that?
Yeah, so Alteryx would describe themselves. For those that didn't hear that, by the way, the question was that all just sort of drag and drop, no coding or anything like that? Yes, that was no coding. Alteryx, as a marketing thing, will describe themselves as code-free, code-friendly. That's why it's quite powerful in organizations. If you want to drag in an R tool or a Python tool or connect to your SQL database and write SQL, you can do code if you want. If you want to just drag in the tools and say, oh, do nearest neighbor analysis, which is actually running a load of R in the background, all you're saying is, here's the field that I'm trying to, or the fields I'm trying to target. It's the same with the predictive tools as well. You can choose to just drag it in if you want. If you want to do the coding and you're familiar with that, you also can. So it's a really flexible tool. In this situation here, it's actually completely code-free, which is great. But yeah, good, really good question, thanks. We've got another. Someone's running, they're already running.
Just a quick question. Yeah, sorry, just a quick question on getting the data together.
Yeah.
How easy was it for this project to just get all the polygons and all of the data and all of the grids and all of your shape files and all of that?
Yeah, great question as well, because that was my biggest concern, was where would we actually get this data? I was in this situation, I was very lucky that the organization Meshpower is working with have loads of brilliant analysts that are already sort of trying to start to solve this, but because they're all startups, they don't have time to invest even 3 back-to-back days, because they're worried about how can we stay afloat over here and worry about this problem and get funding from over there. So it was really useful for them to pass the project over. Because they were passing it over, they'd actually done what I would say is the hard work in getting that data. The flip side of that was there were lots of questions over how legit was this data, which is why they've got someone out there who's going out on bikes and checking out some of these areas now to just check that that polygon data is actually legit. But yeah, great question, thanks. Is that the last one? One more quickly then, yeah. Well, that was the last one. Well, thank you again. Appreciate that, and feel free to get in touch afterwards.